Israel has long been showing how to make the most of limited resources under less than ideal conditions. A large-scale water system based on desalinated water, no problem. Farming in the desert also manageable. However, some of the country's most ambitious projects are happening in the Mediterranean. There, over a certain period, the Israelis lifted more than 71 million cubic feet of sand, silt, and hard rock from the seafloor. That wasn't enough. So, the country later decided to remove an almost unbelievable 529 million cubic feet of material from the bottom of the Mediterranean. On top of that, the Israelis took almost everything they dredged up and didn't just dump it somewhere. They created artificial land, reclaiming more than 247 acres from the sea. A logical question: what's all this for? In short, it's about relationships with Asian countries. But obviously, in short, isn't enough to understand what's going on near Israel. Shores. So, let's go through it in detail. Israel's maritime trade with Asia has long been a steady connection that Tel Aviv depends on. Recently, Israel has been bringing in around 25 to 30% of its total imports from countries in this region. So, where do ships from this distant region dock? The first thing that comes to mind is the port of AOT at the very south of the country on the Red Sea coast. Its location is the most convenient for cargo coming from Asia. For instance, electronics from China are loaded onto ships which then travel thousands of miles, enter the Red Sea, and reach a lot directly. This is the closest route possible. Everyone's happy, pleased, trade is thriving. Well, it would be if the port met modern maritime trade standards. Look, lately, one of the most popular ways to transport containers has been ships that can carry as much cargo as possible in one go. There are, for example, Panamax ships which can carry up to 5,000 20-foot containers or TEUs. Their draft can reach just over 39 feet. Even better are Neo-Panamax ships which can hold up to 14,000 TEUs, making their draft go up to 50 feet. There's also an even more efficient type of ship, ultra-large container vessels. They can carry over 14,500 TEUs with a draft exceeding 50 feet. The depth at a lot cargo piers is between 31 and 33 feet. So none of the ship types mentioned could actually dock here. They just run around. Does that mean the port needs upgrading so larger container ships can unload? No, it's not that simple. Since a lot's development is seriously constrained. The biggest problem is the unique coral reefs in the Gulf of Aqaba. This ecosystem is considered one of the northernmost in the world and is incredibly important for biodiversity, and any large-scale dredging needed to deepen the port of Eilat would be disastrous for marine life. The silt and sediment stirred up from the seabed could smother the corals, and changes in currents would upset the delicate balance of ocean life. As a result, environmental groups oppose such projects, putting the prospect of modernization in jeopardy. The local economy factor is just as important. Eilat's coastal strip is largely geared toward tourism, and expanding marine construction operations will inevitably clash with the interest of hotels, dive centers, and small businesses. And there's definitely reason to worry that tourist numbers will drop, because watching dredging and construction work while lying in a hammock is hardly enjoyable. The same goes for watching huge container ships being unloaded and loaded if the upgrade were ever completed. Even if tourism and the coral reefs weren't affected at all, there would still be another problem. Upgrading AOT is simply inefficient. As we said, AOT's port is located at the very south of the country, while the main cities, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa, are in the center and north at a distance of over 155 miles. Moreover, there's no rail connection at all between ALO and Israel's major cities. Container cargo from large ships will have to be transferred onto wheels and hauled hundreds of miles across the Negev desert to Beersheba, then near a city linked to the rest of Israel by rail. Naturally, this takes time, which drives up the overall cost of shipping goods from Asia to the final destination. If Israel really wants to do everything to make the route from AOT to the main cities of the country efficient, it would require a huge investment. Overall, Eilat is obviously not the best option for the kind of modernization needed for the ever-increasing trade with Asian countries. Israel recognized this too. So for growing trade ties with Far Eastern countries, other ports, Ashdod and he were selected, and Har in particular went through much more extensive modernization. Before all the upgrades, the port of Haya had the usual set of facilities for a working port, but it wasn't exactly what you'd call the main hub for the biggest container ships and other vessels. Depths ranged from 33 to 47 feet in rare spots, and it didn't have enough capacity to handle the huge volumes of cargo coming in from Asia. But then in 2015, a major dredging project kicked off. Israelis set a goal to deepen the bottom enough so the port could handle ULCV-class ships, those ultra-large container vessels. So to reach that goal, work was started during which the shipping channel was deepened from 56 to 57 feet. Specialized equipment was used to carry out this work, including chain bucket dredgers, vessels fitted with a continuous chain of buckets moving in a circle and mechanically scraping the bottom. There's a downside, though. This type of equipment has no hold of its own. So everything scooped from the bottom needs to be loaded onto additional barges. Because of this, a large number of them were also involved in the dredging project. Besides that, dredging was carried out by self-propelled dredgers, which don't have the shortcomings of the previous type of dredging equipment. They're equipped with powerful pumps and long suction pipes that draw a mix of soil and water into the ship's hold. Once the storage is full, these vessels can head to the unloading site on their own without any auxiliary equipment. So there was a huge amount of work, and the team of people and machinery involved in the project was massive. During continuous work, about 529 million cubic feet of soil and sand were lifted from the seabed near Haya. And now imagine all of this could be washed back by silt and other stuff that the sea brings with the waves. Of course, no one waits for the moment when all the 529 million cubic feet come back. So regular cleaning is carried out. The silt and soil are lifted at intervals using the same equipment. You could say that dredging near Haya continues to this day. The question comes up, where did all those 529 million cubic feet of material lifted from the seabed end up? Well, the answer might shock you. 176 million cubic feet were placed elsewhere on the seabed, while the remaining 353 million cubic feet were used by the Israelis to make an artificial land mass covering 207 acres. They needed it to construct a state-of-the-art terminal named Bayport. First, they picked a spot in the northeast part of the bay and put up a box, drove metal walls around the perimeter to separate the future site from the sea. These walls kept the water out and made it possible to work inside the area as if it were a huge pool. After that, temporary partitions were set up around the perimeter so they could fill the sections gradually and monitor how the soil settled. The embankment was built in layers. First, a layer of sand was brought into the fenced pocket. Then, it was compacted by machines. Then, another layer was added and compacted again. This was repeated until the level reached the design height. Drainage channels and pipes were laid inside the embankment so that water would run off faster and the soil would become firm. This is important to prevent future settling. Once the embankment reached the right height and density, they moved on to the foundations. They dug out the pits, poured massive concrete slabs and grillages, the things that would hold the quar and heavy cranes. On the finished ground, they set up the bases for the crane tracks and prepared spots for laying rails and storage yards. And then, of course, the construction of the Bayport terminal began. They built the key walls needed for docking ships along with some auxiliary facilities. On top of that, giant cranes for cargo handling were set up along the docks. These cranes are among the largest in the world, capable of servicing ULCV-class ships as well as lifting and moving containers quickly and accurately. Their design and lifting capacity allow handling up to several dozen containers per hour from a single vessel. On the terminal grounds beyond the docks, extensive container yards were set up. Automated stacker cranes controlled remotely were installed to service them. These cranes, following a set program, move, sort, and store containers, which greatly boosts efficiency and reduces cargo handling time. An important part of the project was the construction of an automated entry gate system for trucks, which uses electronic systems and license plate recognition to ensure fast access to the port, minimizing queues and congestion. In addition to the specialized equipment, all the essential supporting infrastructure was set up. It included building a new advanced road network inside the port and connecting it straight to the national highways, ensuring uninterrupted cargo movement. Extra focus was placed on their railway infrastructure. New tracks were installed on the territory of the terminal connected to the nationwide system, which made it possible to divert some cargo to rail and ease road traffic. Modern administrative offices, technical structures, and power substations for the port were also put in place. All this sounds great. Yet ports almost always have one issue. They gradually get worn down by the sea. As the saying goes, water wears down stone. And Bayport's no different. That's why the Israelis decided as part of a major project to launch a separate large-scale project, breakwaters, which of course will also gradually wear down, but the terminal with its artificial island will stay intact. The main breakwater, which was already in the port before, was extended by 2,890 feet, and in addition, an auxiliary breakwater was built, which is longer, 1.3 miles. This breakwater also served a key protective function, but its design included both earthen sections made of large stones and parts made of reinforced concrete casings, which were prefabricated onshore, launched into the water, towed to their spot, filled, and lowered onto the seabed. The total number of protective elements used for the breakwaters, including concrete cubes, reached about 43,300 pieces of various sizes and weights, along with 5.3 million tons of stone. These impressive figures highlight why the construction of the Bayport breakwaters can be called a truly massive undertaking. In the end, everything works. The waves hit, but gradually they wear down the protective structures, not the terminal or the artificial island. Also, it's worth noting that the breakwaters also guard against sediment carried in from the sea, which reduces the depth of the port area. Actually, this wasn't the only major construction in Haport. Before this, in 2010, another terminal located near Bayport called Carmel was completed. The project for this terminal started with the usual dredging works, but this time much less material was lifted from the bottom, 88 million cubic feet. Still, the amount that was lifted was enough to dredge the spot to the required depth of 51 feet. You think this time the Israelis built the terminal on existing land? No. Space was tight, so they created an artificial area right in the sea covering 2.4 million square feet. The embankment design included multiple layers of soil compaction and shoreline protection against erosion. Stone breakwaters, geoexiles, and a drainage system were used to ensure the stability and durability of the artificial land. On this prepared area, they built berths totaling 3,116 feet, 2,296 feet for the main and 820 feet for the auxiliary. Then on the land reclaimed from the sea, they built the necessary buildings, infrastructure, and of course set up the equipment. 6 modern heavy cranes arrived along with 12 RMG electric stackers to speed up operations. This made it possible to greatly reduce ship processing time and improve logistics efficiency. And now to the most important question. What did all this modernization actually bring to Israel? To start with, of course, a lot more cargo from Asia could now make its way to Israel. After Carmel opened, the country was able to handle post-Panamax ships with capacities of up to 15.5000 TEU. But then with Bayport's launch, Israel gained the ability to take in ultra-large container ships with total capacities of 18,000 TEU and more. Generally speaking, the throughput capacity of the port in hire, including all the upgrades and new terminals, stood at about 1.53 million TEU in 2023. Sure, that's a far cry from global giants like the port of Shanghai, which moves an incredible 47 million TEU a year, but it's still the first port in Israel capable of handling that kind of cargo volume. It should be noted that the ability to handle some of the largest container ships in the world helped save money for Israel, for Asian countries, and for all other nations that use the port of HA. The reason simple. Instead of sending 2 or 3 smaller watercraft with lower carrying capacity, you can send one big ship, which brings cost down significantly. The upgrades have also turned hire into a key transit hub in the Eastern Mediterranean. Cargo from Asia can be unloaded in HA and then transferred to smaller vessels for delivery to other regional ports such as in Greece, Cyprus, or Egypt. For example, that's what happened in 2012 when the Master of Science Golden Gate arrived in HA. During the stopover, about 1,600 container loading and unloading operations were carried out at an average rate of roughly 191 containers per hour, which for that time was quite a high figure for hire. However, the most important thing was that among the unloaded goods, there was a shipment bound for transit to Egypt to the port of Alexandria. In other words, the port of Ha became the gateway to the eastern Mediterranean for cargo from Asia and Oceania. And that's not only an honorable title, but also a big benefit for Israel itself, since the end customers pay for having their goods unloaded in the country. Automation and advanced technology of the new terminals, including modern cranes and control systems, have greatly cut down cargo handling times. Naturally, this means the sending and receiving sides both benefit. Fewer delays mean fewer situations where anyone in the supply chain loses money. For the domestic economy, modernizing the port means creating thousands of new jobs, both in the port itself and in related sectors: transport, logistics, warehousing, equipment repair and maintenance, cargo insurance. This boosts economic activity in the north of the country, helps develop Haifa as an industrial and trade hub, and narrows the gap between the center and the periphery. All in all, thanks in part to its highly developed port infrastructure, the city and the region as a whole are seen as among the most important in all of Israel. Back in the early 2010s, there was a lot of talk about a project that would probably have kept the modernization of Haifa's ports from moving ahead so actively. Remember how we talked about how the port of AOT isn't really fit for development? Well, more than 10 years ago, the Israelis started wondering, if upgrading it comes with so many problems, why not just move the port of AOT somewhere else? That's how the Southern Gate project came about. The resourceful locals decided not to move the port to some nearby coastal spot. The idea was to take AOT inland to the north, about 2.8 miles from the city itself. The port was to be set up in a prepared zone, and its connection to the Gulf of Aqaba was to run through a canal along the Jordanian border stretching 2.4 miles long and about 328 feet wide. This channel would serve as the entrance to a new port, freeing up the coastline for tourism development and removing the limits caused by competition over land between the port and the city. And the coral reefs wouldn't suffer from large-scale construction either. However, the project was never carried out. Such a massive construction would have required huge expenses, which according to experts' estimates were valued at over $3 billion. But the main thing was that there simply wasn't any political backing. That's why a lot never became Israel's main hub for maritime trade with Asia, unlike Haifa Port.